The stench of whiskey and cigar smoke choked the air in the Silver Dollar Saloon, as Evangeline McCarthy stood frozen behind her stepfather's chair, her hands trembling against the worn wood. The card game had been going for 6 hours, and Walter Pierce had lost everything: the mercantile, the wagon, even the roof over their heads. His bloodshot eyes darted between his remaining chips and the mountain of money in the center of the table, his desperation a living thing that made her stomach turn to ice. "I'm out," he slurred, pushing back from the table. Then his gaze landed on her, and something cold slithered down her spine. "Wait, I got one more thing to wager." Before she could move, his meaty hand clamped around her wrist. "My stepdaughter, 20 years old, can cook, clean, and she's untouched. Worth more than all that gold combined." The saloon fell silent. Evangeline's heart hammered against her ribs as 5 pairs of eyes turned toward her. 4 with varying degrees of interest and disgust, and 1 pair of steel-gray eyes that made her breath catch. Those eyes belonged to the man everyone feared, the cattle baron who owned half of Wyoming territory, Matthias Cade. Before we continue with Evangeline and Matthias's story, I'd love to ask you to take a moment to subscribe to our channel and give this video a like. It truly means so much to us and helps us bring you more quality content like this. Also, I'm curious, where are you listening to this story from? Let us know in the comments. Matthias Cade didn't move, didn't blink. He was a mountain of a man, 6'4", with shoulders that seemed to fill the entire corner of the saloon. His black hair fell past his collar, and a scar ran from his left eyebrow to his cheekbone, a souvenir from a Sioux raid 5 years back that had taken his wife and unborn child. He dressed in black from his Stetson to his boots, and the twin Colts at his hips had ended more lives than anyone cared to count. "You're wagering a human being," Matthias said, his voice a low rumble that carried the weight of thunder. Each word was deliberate, dangerous. "In a poker game." Walter Pierce's face reddened. "She's my property, legal and binding. Her mama married me before she died, and Evangeline here owes me for 3 years of food and shelter." "I owe you nothing." Evangeline found her voice, though it shook. "You drank away everything my mother left me. You—" The back of Walter's hand caught her cheek, snapping her head to the side. Pain exploded across her face, and she tasted copper. The room erupted in shouts, but through the ringing in her ears, she heard the distinctive sound of a gun being cocked. Matthias Cade stood now, one Colt pointed directly at Walter Pierce's forehead. "Touch her again, and they'll be scraping your brains off that wall." His voice remained calm, almost conversational, which made the threat infinitely more terrifying. Walter's hands shot up, his face draining of color. "Here's what's going to happen," Matthias continued, his gray eyes never leaving the trembling man. "You're going to put that girl in the wager, and I'm going to call. When I win, and I will win, she walks out of here free, not as property, as a person." Evangeline's knees nearly buckled. She looked at the cards scattered on the table, at the fortune and gold and bills, at the 4 other men who nodded slowly. One of them, a banker named Sutton, cleared his throat. "Cade's got a full house, aces over kings. What you got, Pierce?" Walter's hands shook as he laid down his cards. 2 pair, nothing. "She's mine," Matthias said flatly. He holstered his Colt and began stacking his winnings with methodical precision. Then he turned those storm cloud eyes on Evangeline. "Get your things. Whatever belongs to you, take it now." "I don't have anything," she whispered, touching her throbbing cheek. He sold it all. Something flickered in Matthias's expression. Not pity, but understanding laced with fury. Then we leave now. He shrugged out of his long black coat and draped it over her shoulders. It smelled of leather and sage and something indefinably masculine that made her head spin. As they walked toward the door, Walter called out, "You can't just take her! She's—" Matthias turned, and whatever Walter saw in his face made him swallow the rest of his words. "She's not property anymore. You so much as look at her again, and I'll make you wish that bullet had found your brain instead of that wall. We clear?" The night air hit Evangeline like a slap, cold and clean after the suffocating saloon. Her legs finally gave out on the wooden sidewalk, and she would have fallen if Matthias hadn't caught her elbow. His hand was huge, calloused, but his grip was surprisingly gentle. "Easy," he said. "When's the last time you ate?" She couldn't remember. 2 days? 3? "I'm fine. You're shaking, you're pale as death, and you nearly fainted. That's not fine." He guided her toward a massive black stallion tied to the hitching post. The horse snorted and stamped, its eyes rolling white. "This is Midnight. He's ornery as hell, but he won't hurt you." "I can't ride," she admitted, shame coloring her cheeks. "Then you'll learn, but not tonight." Instead of mounting, he led the horse down the main street toward a small hotel. "You'll stay at the Grand tonight. Tomorrow, we head to my ranch." Evangeline stopped walking. "I don't understand. You won me in a poker game, but you say I'm not property. What am I supposed to be?" Matthias turned, and in the lamplight spilling from the hotel windows, she could see the exhaustion etched into his face, the lines around his eyes that spoke of too much loss. "You're a woman who needs a fresh start. I'm a man with a ranch bigger than some counties, and not enough hands to work it. I'm offering you a job, a room, and safety. You can cook, you said? My current cook couldn't burn water if he tried. A job?" The word felt foreign on her tongue. 3 squares a day, a room in the main house, and wages. $30 a month. He named a sum that made her gasp. "You don't owe me anything, and you can leave whenever you want. But out here, a woman alone doesn't last long. At my ranch, nobody touches you without your say-so. Nobody. That includes me." Tears burned behind her eyes, but she blinked them back. "Why? Why would you do this?" For a long moment, Matthias didn't answer. Then he said, quietly, "Because 5 years ago, someone should have done it for my wife. Nobody did, and she paid the price. I can't change the past, but maybe I can keep history from repeating itself." He tipped his hat. "Get some sleep. I'll be back at first light." He handed her a roll of bills, more money than she'd ever seen, and walked away, leading Midnight into the darkness. Evangeline stood there, Matthias Cade's coat still wrapped around her shoulders, and for the first time in 3 years, she felt something dangerous bloom in her chest. Hope. The Cade Ranch sprawled across the valley like a kingdom of grass and cattle, with the Wind River Mountains rising purple and white in the distance. Evangeline had expected something rough, a log cabin maybe, but the main house was a 2-story structure of whitewashed wood with a wraparound porch and real glass windows. A dozen smaller buildings dotted the property, bunkhouses, barns, a smokehouse, corrals stretching as far as she could see. 7,500 acres, Matthias said as they rode through the main gate. He'd insisted she ride with him, seated in front of him on Midnight's broad back, his arm a steel band around her waist to keep her steady. The heat of his body behind her had made the 3-hour journey both comforting and confusing. We run about 3,000 head of cattle, plus horses. I've got 20 men working the spread and an old Lakota woman named Ayashe who helps with the house. That's a lot of responsibility, Evangeline said, craning her neck to take it all in. It's a lot of empty space, Matthias corrected. House rattles with it. He helped her down from the horse, with his hands spanning her waist, setting her on the ground as easily as if she weighed nothing. A weathered woman, with silver-streaked black hair, emerged from the house, her dark eyes sharp as she took in Evangeline's bruised face and borrowed coat. "This is the girl?" Ayashe asked in accented English. "This is Evangeline McCarthy. She'll be doing the cooking." Matthias loosened Midnight's saddle. "Eva, this is Ayashe. She'll show you your room and the kitchen. Anything you need, you ask her." "I thought you said I would have a room in the main house." Evangeline's voice came out smaller than she intended. Matthias paused, his hands still on the saddle. "You do. Upstairs, end of the hall. Overlooks the east pasture. I'm in the west wing, other end of the house." He turned, and his gray eyes held hers. "You're safe here, Eva. I give you my word." The way he shortened her name sent an unexpected warmth through her chest. She nodded, not trusting her voice. Ayashe led her inside, through a front room furnished with heavy wooden furniture and Navajo rugs, past a dining table that could seat 20, and up a staircase with a carved banister. The room Matthias had given her was larger than the entire space she'd shared with Walter, with a real bed covered in a star-patterned quilt, a wardrobe, a washstand with a porcelain pitcher and basin, and windows that framed the mountains like a painting. "He does not bring women here," Ayashe said abruptly, setting down a stack of clothes on the bed. Simple work dresses, a split riding skirt, wool stockings. 5 years since Rebecca died, and not one woman has set foot in this house except me. "I'm just the cook," Evangeline said quickly. Ayashe's knowing smile was almost motherly. "The last cook was a one-eyed man named Stumpy who made beans that could wake the dead. You are not just the cook." She moved toward the door, then paused. "Matthias Cade is a hard man because this land requires it. But his heart is not dead, just buried. Be patient with him." Over the next 2 weeks, Evangeline fell into a rhythm that felt like the first honest work of her life. She woke before dawn to start the stove, baked bread and biscuits, prepared vast quantities of bacon, eggs, and potatoes for the ranch hands who filed through the kitchen with hungry eyes and polite nods. She learned to make beef stew that didn't burn, to fry chicken until the crust crackled, to bake apple pies with crusts that flaked like snow. Matthias ate at the main table with her and Ayashe, silent for the most part, but his gray eyes tracked her movements with an intensity that made her hyper-aware of every gesture. Sometimes she'd catch him looking at her hands as she passed him the salt, or at the curve of her neck when she turned to check the stove, and the air would grow thick with something unspoken. "You're getting better," he said one evening, his fork pausing over a piece of roast that actually tasted like meat instead of shoe leather. "This is almost edible." Evangeline threw a dish towel at him, shocked by her own boldness. He caught it, one-handed, and the corner of his mouth quirked. Not quite a smile, but close enough to make her heart stutter. "Almost edible," she repeated, indignant. "I slaved over that roast for 4 hours." "And it shows," Matthias said, and this time he did smile, a real one that transformed his harsh face into something almost boyish. "I'm joking, Eva. It's the best meal I've had in 5 years." The moment stretched between them, charged and fragile. until Ayesha cleared her throat meaningfully and began collecting plates. But the peace couldn't last. On a Tuesday morning, 3 weeks after her arrival, Evangeline was in the henhouse collecting eggs when she heard the sound of horses. Too many horses, moving too fast. She emerged to see 6 riders approaching, led by a man with a pot belly and mean eyes that she recognized with a sickening lurch. Marshal Vernon Tibbs, Walter Pierce's brother-in-law. Matthias was at the barn with 3 of his hands, and he stepped into the yard with that same deceptive calm she'd seen in the saloon. His hand didn't touch his gun, but everyone knew it could in a heartbeat. "Tibbs," Matthias said flatly, "you're on my land." "Performing my duty," Tibbs said, his voice oily with false authority. The tin star on his chest caught the sunlight. "Got a report that you're harboring stolen property, specifically one Evangeline McCarthy, who was legally promised to her stepfather's care." "She was offered as a poker table wager," Matthias corrected, his voice dropping to that dangerous register that made Evangeline's blood run cold. "I won her fair and square, then set her free. She works for me now, by her own choice." "That's not how the law sees it," Tibbs said, and 2 of his men dismounted, moving toward the henhouse where Evangeline stood frozen. "Woman's place is with her legal guardian until she marries. Pierce has rights." "Pierce has nothing." Matthias moved faster than a man his size should be able to, putting himself between Evangeline and the approaching deputies. "And if you think you're taking her off my land, you're dumber than you look." One of the deputies, young and nervous, reached for his gun. The crack of Matthias's Colt was deafening in the morning air, and the kid's hat flew off his head. A neat hole burned through the crown. He stumbled backward, hands up, eyes wide with terror. "Next one goes between someone's eyes," Matthias said conversationally. "Your choice whose?" Tibbs' face purpled. "You're interfering with the law. I'm protecting what's mine." The words came out low and possessive, and Evangeline felt them in her bones. "She works for me. She lives under my roof, and she's under my protection. You want to challenge that? You can try. But ask yourself if your brother-in-law's $50 debt is worth dying over." For a long moment, nobody moved. Then Tibbs spat into the dirt and jerked his reins, wheeling his horse around. "This ain't over, Cade. Law's the law, and you can't hide behind your guns forever." "I'm not hiding behind anything," Matthias said. "I'm standing right here. You know where to find me." They watched the riders disappear in a cloud of dust. When the sound of hoofbeats faded, Evangeline realized she was shaking so hard her teeth chattered. Matthias turned, and something in his expression made her step back instinctively. Not fear, but something more complicated. "They'll be back," he said quietly, "with more men, maybe a judge's order. I need to know, Eva, do you want to stay here? Because if you do, I'll fight for you. But if you want to leave, run somewhere they can't find you. I'll give you money and a horse and point you toward California. Your choice. Always your choice." "I want to stay." The words came out fierce, surprising them both. "This is the first place I've felt safe since my mother died. I'm not letting Walter or his corrupt brother-in-law take that from me." Matthias nodded once, decisive. "Then we do this right. Legal, binding." He took off his hat, ran a hand through his dark hair, and when he looked at her again, his gray eyes were storm clouds before lightning. "Marry me." The world tilted. "What?" "Marry me," he repeated, each word deliberate. "As my wife, you're under my name and my protection. No judge in the territory would side with Pierce over a husband's rights, especially not if that husband is me. He held up a hand before she could speak. I'm not asking you to be a real wife. Separate rooms, separate lives. Just a legal arrangement to keep you safe. You can leave whenever you want, and I'll make sure the papers say you get a settlement. But this stops Tibbs, stops Pierce, stops anyone from claiming you as property ever again. Evangeline's mind reeled. You'd do that? Marry a stranger just to protect her? You're not a stranger anymore. Matthias's voice softened almost imperceptibly. You're Eva. You make the coffee too strong and burn every third batch of biscuits. And you throw dish towels when you're mad. And you sing when you think nobody's listening. You deserve better than running your whole life. Tears blurred her vision. What do you get out of this? For a long moment, he didn't answer. Then he said, so quietly she almost missed it, maybe a reason to stop being alone. She should have said no, should have asked for time to think, to consider all the implications. But standing in the dusty yard, with the sun beating down and the memory of Tibbs's greedy eyes fresh in her mind, Evangeline realized she didn't want time. She wanted safety, yes, but more than that, she wanted to stay here, in this place that felt like home, with this hard man who'd shown her more kindness in 3 weeks than she'd known in 3 years. Yes, she said, I'll marry you. Something flickered in Matthias's expression. Relief, maybe, or something deeper. He nodded once, replaced his hat, and turned toward the barn. I'll send Ayashi to town for the preacher. We'll do it tonight, before Tibbs gets any ideas about coming back. He walked away, his broad shoulders set in determined lines, and Evangeline realized with a jolt that her life had just changed forever. She was going to marry Matthias Cade, the most feared cattle baron in Wyoming Territory, in a business arrangement born of desperation. So why did her heart race like she'd just made the most dangerous, thrilling decision of her life? They married at sunset on the front porch of the ranch house, with Ayashi and 3 of the most trusted ranch hands as witnesses. Evangeline wore a simple blue dress that Ayashi had produced from somewhere, and Matthias stood beside her, in clean black trousers and a white shirt that made his shoulders look impossibly broad. The circuit preacher, a thin man with kind eyes, asked if she came of her own free will. I do, Evangeline said, her voice steady. He asked if Matthias promised to honor and protect her. With my life, Matthias said, and the weight of those words settled over them like a vow carved in stone. When the preacher pronounced them man and wife, Matthias leaned down and kissed her forehead, a chaste, brief touch that nonetheless sent heat flooding through her veins. His lips were warm against her skin, and she caught a scent of pine and leather that made her dizzy. Thank you, he murmured against her temple. So softly, only she could hear. They celebrated with a simple dinner, and the ranch hands raised glasses of whiskey to the new Mrs. Cade. Evangeline tried to ignore the weight of the gold band Matthias had slipped onto her finger during the ceremony. His mother's ring, Ayashi had whispered, kept in a locked box for 5 years. When the stars came out and the hands drifted back to their bunkhouses, Matthias walked her upstairs. They stood in the hallway between their doors, the space charged with unspoken things. Nothing changes, he said, his voice rough. You're still in your room. I'm in mine. This was just paper and words to keep you safe. Just paper and words, Evangeline repeated, trying to ignore the sharp twist of disappointment in her chest. Right. Matthias's hand rose as if to touch her cheek, then fell back to his side. Good night, Eva. Good night, husband. She saw him flinch at the word, before he turned away, disappearing into his room. Evangeline stood there for a long moment, her fingers tracing the unfamiliar weight of the ring, before retreating to her own bed that suddenly felt too big and too empty. 3 days after the wedding, Walter Pierce made his move. Evangeline was hanging laundry in the side yard, enjoying the spring sunshine and the way the wet sheets snapped in the wind, when she heard the crack of a rifle shot. The clothespin fell from her nerveless fingers as she watched Matthias stumble near the barn, a red bloom spreading across his left shoulder. No! The scream tore from her throat as 6 men on horseback burst from the tree line. Walter Pierce at the lead, his face twisted with rage and whiskey courage. "Thought you could steal from me, you bitch!" Walter bellowed, raising his rifle for another shot. "Thought that bastard could protect you?" Time seemed to slow. Evangeline saw Matthias reaching for his Colt with his right hand, his left arm hanging useless, blood soaking his shirt. She saw the ranch hands running from the barn, but they were too far away, too slow. She saw Walter's finger tightening on the trigger, the barrel aimed at Matthias's chest, and she moved. The shotgun was where Matthias had showed her 3 days ago, propped inside the kitchen door for emergencies. Her hands shook as she grabbed it, as she ran back into the yard, as she raised the heavy weapon to her shoulder, the way he taught her during their one abbreviated lesson. "Eva, don't!" Matthias's roar was full of terror, but she was already squeezing the trigger. The recoil slammed her backward, and the sound was a physical thing that rattled her bones. But through the smoke, she saw Walter's horse rearing in panic, saw him tumbling from the saddle to land hard in the dirt. The shot had missed him by inches, intentionally, but the message was clear. "The next one won't miss," Evangeline screamed, pumping the shotgun the way Matthias had shown her, chambering another shell. Her whole body shook, but her voice was steel. "Get off this land, or I swear to God I'll kill you myself." Walter scrambled to his feet, eyes wide with shock that his meek stepdaughter stood there, looking like an avenging angel. Behind her, she heard the distinctive sound of a dozen rifles being cocked as the ranch hands formed a line. And that finally penetrated his whiskey-soaked brain. "This ain't over," he slurred, stumbling toward his horse. "Yes, it is." Matthias's voice cut through the chaos, and Evangeline turned to see him standing with his Colt drawn, despite the blood streaming down his arm. "You come on my land again, you threaten my wife again, and there won't be enough left of you to bury." "That's not a threat, Pierce. That's a promise." Walter and his men fled, and the ranch hands gave chase to make sure they left the territory. The shotgun fell from Evangeline's numb fingers, and suddenly Matthias was there, wrapping his good arm around her, as she started to shake in earnest. "I've got you," he murmured into her hair. "You're safe, you're safe." "You're bleeding," she said inanely, her fingers finding the wet warmth soaking his shirt. "Oh God, Matthias, you're bleeding. Just a graze." But his face had gone pale, and when she pressed against the wound, he hissed in pain. "Eva, go slow. It hurts." Those words, so vulnerable from a man who'd never shown weakness, broke something in her chest. "Come on," she said, slipping under his good shoulder. "Let's get you inside before you pass out on me." Ayesha had the kitchen table cleared and hot water boiling by the time they stumbled through the door. Together they eased Matthias into a chair, and Evangeline used her sewing scissors to cut away his shirt. The bullet had torn through the meat of his shoulder, missing bone but leaving a furrow that bled freely. "Needs cauterizing," Ayesha said grimly, moving toward the stove, where she'd already set a knife in the flames. "No," Evangeline caught her wrist. I can stitch it. Ayashi, get me needle and thread, the strong kind we use for leather. And whiskey. Lots of whiskey. For the next hour, Evangeline worked with steady hands she didn't know she possessed. She cleaned the wound with whiskey that made Matthias bite down on a leather strap to keep from screaming, then stitched the torn flesh back together with neat, careful strokes. Sweat poured down his face. His good hand clenched white-knuckled on the table edge, but he never once told her to stop. Almost done, she murmured, tying off the last stitch. You're doing so well, Matthias. Just a little longer. When she finally bandaged his shoulder with clean linen, his head dropped forward, and she thought he might have passed out. But then his right hand found hers, his calloused fingers interlacing with her smaller ones, and he looked up at her with those storm-gray eyes that had haunted her dreams. You saved my life, he said hoarsely. You could have run, could have let Pierce take you and saved yourself. But you stayed. You fought. For me. Of course I did. Tears spilled down her cheeks before she could stop them. You're my husband. Paper and words, Matthias said, but there was a question in his eyes. No. Evangeline surprised herself with the vehemence of her response. She cupped his face in her hands, feeling the rough stubble of his jaw, the heat of his skin. Not anymore. Not for me. I don't know when it happened. Maybe when you refused Walter's offer in the saloon, or when you gave me your coat, or when you taught me to load a shotgun even though I was terrified. But somewhere along the way, this stopped being just an arrangement. You're not just my protector, Matthias. You're... She couldn't finish, couldn't put words to the enormous, terrifying thing blooming in her chest. But Matthias did it for her. You're mine, he said roughly, his good hand coming up to cover hers against his cheek. Not as property, never as property, as something precious, something worth saving. Eva, I swore I wouldn't feel this again, wouldn't let anyone close enough to destroy me the way losing Rebecca did. But you, he laughed, a broken sound. You stormed into my life through a poker game and turned everything upside down. Is that bad? She whispered. It's terrifying. His thumb traced her cheekbone, wiping away a tear. But I don't want you to stop. I don't want you in that room down the hall. I want you with me. I want to wake up to your terrible coffee and your burnt biscuits and the sound of you singing when you think I can't hear. I want... Evangeline kissed him. It was clumsy and desperate, her lips finding his mid-sentence, swallowing his words. For a heartbeat, he froze. Then his good arm banded around her waist, hauling her closer, and he was kissing her back with a hunger that stole her breath. His mouth was hot and demanding, tasting of whiskey and pain and something dark and sweet that made her head spin. She gasped against his lips, and he took advantage, deepening the kiss until she was dizzy with it, drowning in the feel of his hand tangled in her hair, the press of his muscular body against hers despite his injury. Eva, he groaned against her mouth. I'll die before I hurt you. Tell me to stop, and I will. Don't stop, she breathed. Don't you dare stop. Matthias stood, lifting her with his good arm as if she weighed nothing, and carried her toward the stairs. Ayesha materialized from the shadows, a knowing smile on her weathered face, and simply handed Evangeline a small cloth bag that smelled of herbs. For after, the old woman said cryptically, and disappeared back into the kitchen. Matthias kicked open the door to his room, their room now, and set Evangeline on her feet beside a massive four-poster bed covered in furs. The windows were open, letting in the cooling evening air and the sound of crickets. and silver moonlight painted everything in shades of blue and shadow. "I've never," Evangeline started, then stopped, her cheeks burning. "I don't know how to—" "Neither do I," Matthias admitted, his voice rough. "Not like this, not when it matters so much." His good hand cupped her face, tilting it up so she had to meet his eyes. "We'll figure it out together. Go slow. And if you change your mind, if anything hurts or frightens you, you tell me. Promise me, Eva." "I promise." She reached up to unbutton his torn shirt, her fingers trembling. "But I'm not changing my mind. I want this. I want you." What followed was clumsy and sweet and perfect in its imperfection. They learned each other by moonlight, trading breathless kisses and whispered discoveries. And when Matthias finally made her his wife in truth, the brief flare of pain was washed away by the overwhelming rightness of being held in his arms, skin to skin, heart to heart. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the furs, Evangeline's head on Matthias's uninjured shoulder, his heartbeat steady beneath her ear. His fingers traced lazy patterns on her bare back, and she felt the rumble of his voice as he spoke. "I see a woman worth saving," he murmured into her hair. "But you didn't need saving, did you? You saved yourself. Saved me too, in more ways than one." "We saved each other," Evangeline corrected, pressing a kiss to his chest. "Together." "Together," Matthias repeated, and the words sounded like a vow, like a promise, like the beginning of something permanent and precious. She fell asleep to the sound of his breathing and the feel of his arm around her. And for the first time since her mother died, Evangeline felt completely, utterly safe. Spring turned to summer, and summer to fall. Walter Pierce was found dead in a ditch 3 towns over, his liver finally giving out from years of abuse, and Marshal Tibbs mysteriously resigned from his position after evidence of corruption surfaced in his office. Evangeline never asked if Matthias had anything to do with either event, and he never offered an explanation. The ranch flourished under their combined efforts. Evangeline's cooking improved until the hands started bringing their friends by on the pretense of business, just to get a taste of her famous apple pie. She learned in turn. She taught him to laugh again, to let himself be vulnerable, to accept comfort when his nightmares of Rebecca and the Sioux raid woke him in the dark hours. They grew into each other like 2 trees planted close together, roots intertwining beneath the surface until you couldn't tell where one ended and the other began. On a crisp October morning, Evangeline woke to find Matthias already dressed, sitting on the edge of their bed with something small cradled in his large hands. When she sat up, he turned and offered it to her. A wooden music box, intricately carved with sage flowers and prairie grasses. "I made it for you," he said gruffly, his ears reddening with embarrassment. "Took me 3 months of evenings in the barn." "Open it." Inside, a tiny mechanism played a sweet, simple tune, and beneath the velvet lining was a folded piece of paper. Evangeline's hands shook as she read the words written in Matthias's careful, blocky script. To Eva, who was offered as a poker table wager and rose as bride to the Wild West's most feared cattle baron ever. You are not winnings from a game of chance. You are the greatest fortune of my life. You are not property. You are my partner, my love, my home. Forever yours. Matthias's tears blurred her vision, and when she looked up, Matthias was watching her with an expression so tender, it made her chest ache. "I love you," she said, the word she'd been holding back for months, finally breaking free. I love you so much, it terrifies me. Good. Matthias pulled her into his arms, burying his face in her hair. Because I love you too, Eva Cade. From that first moment in the saloon, when you looked at me like I might save you, to right now when I know you're the one who saved me. You're mine, and I'm yours, and that's never changing. Together, Evangeline whispered against his chest. Together, Matthias agreed and kissed her as the sun rose over the Wind River Mountains, painting their world in gold and light and infinite promise. Epilogue. 5 years later, the Cade Ranch had doubled in size and tripled in reputation. Not as the domain of the feared cattle baron, but as a sanctuary for women who needed a fresh start. Evangeline had convinced Matthias to hire 3 women fleeing bad situations, and their success had inspired others. Now, 10 women work the ranch alongside the men, earning fair wages and learning skills that made them independent. Evangeline stood on the porch of the ranch house, expanded now, with additional bedrooms and a proper schoolhouse for the children who'd come along with some of the women, and watched Matthias teaching their 3-year-old daughter, Rebecca Grace, how to sit a horse. The little girl had his gray eyes and dark hair, but Evangeline's stubborn determination and fierce heart. "Mama," Becca called, waving enthusiastically. "Look, I'm riding all by myself." Matthias's hand never left the child's back, his expression soft with devotion. He caught Evangeline's eye and grinned, a full, genuine smile that still had the power to make her heart race after 7 years of marriage. Ayashe emerged from the house, carrying 2-year-old Samuel on her hip. The boy had Matthias's size and Evangeline's laugh, and he already showed signs of being as wild as his father. "Your family is loud," Ayashe said dryly, but her eyes were warm as she watched Matthias swing Becca down from the horse and toss her in the air, her squeals of delight echoing across the valley. "Yes," Evangeline agreed, her hand resting on the gentle swell of her belly where baby number 3 grew. "Yes, they are." Matthias walked toward her, with Becca chattering away in his arms, Samuel squirming to get to his father, and Evangeline thought about that night in the Silver Dollar Saloon when her stepfather had offered her as a poker wager. She thought about how Matthias had won her hand not with cards, but with honor and courage, and an unwavering belief that she was worth saving. But more than that, she thought about how they'd saved each other, 2 broken people who'd found wholeness in the vast, harsh, beautiful landscape of the Wild West. "What are you thinking about?" Matthias asked, settling beside her on the porch steps, with Becca in his lap and Samuel climbing on his shoulders. Evangeline leaned into his solid warmth, his free arm coming around her automatically. "About how I was offered as a poker table wager," she said softly, "and how I rose as bride to the Wild West's most feared cattle baron ever." "Not so feared anymore," Matthias said wryly. "No," Evangeline agreed, watching their children laugh and play. "Not feared, loved, respected. Home." "Home," Matthias repeated, and kissed her temple. "Best hand I ever won." "Best bet I ever made," Evangeline countered, and as the sun set over their kingdom of grass and dreams, she knew with absolute certainty that some gambles were worth taking. Some gambles changed everything, and some gambles, against all odds, turned into forever. The winter of 1873 came hard and fast, burying the ranch under 3 feet of snow by November. Evangeline stood at the kitchen window, watching Matthias and his men drive cattle toward the southern pastures, where the wind had cleared some grazing space. Even from this distance, she could see the tension in her husband's shoulders, the way he sat midnight with the weariness of a man who hadn't slept properly in days. They were losing cattle. Not many yet, but enough to worry. The cold had come early, catching them unprepared, and now every day was a race against nature to save as much of the herd as possible. "He will make himself sick," Ayashi said from behind her, kneading bread dough with practiced efficiency. 3 nights he has stayed out in the cold. His shoulder, the old wound, it pains him in this weather. Evangeline knew she'd seen him wince when he thought she wasn't looking, seen him favor his right arm. The bullet wound from Walter Pierce had healed clean, but cold weather made the scar tissue ache. She'd offered to rub liniment on it, but Matthias had waved her off, insisting he was fine. Stubborn man. "I'm taking him food," Evangeline announced, already moving to pack supplies. "And I'm not taking no for an answer." Ayashi smiled knowingly. "Take the bear fur and the whiskey. He will need both." An hour later, Evangeline sat astride Buttercup. She still refused to ride midnight alone in snow this deep. With saddlebags full of hot stew, fresh bread, and a bottle of Matthias's good whiskey. The ride to the southern pasture was brutal, wind cutting through her heavy coat like knives, but she kept going. She found him at the line shack, a small cabin the hands used during cattle drives. Smoke rose from the chimney, and 3 horses stood in the rough shelter beside it. Evangeline dismounted awkwardly, her legs stiff from the cold, and pushed open the door. Matthias looked up from where he sat near the fire, and his expression cycled through surprise, relief, and anger in quick succession. "Eva, what the hell are you doing out here? It's 20 degrees and getting colder." "Bringing my husband food before he freezes to death," she said tartly, setting the saddlebags on the rough table. "When's the last time you ate?" He didn't answer, which was answer enough. The 2 hands with him, young Tom Bridger and the older Frank Yates, exchanged glances and suddenly found reasons to check on the horses outside. "You shouldn't be out in this," Matthias said, but his eyes tracked her movements hungrily as she unpacked the stew. "The baby." "The baby is fine. I'm fine. You, however, look like death warmed over." She ladled stew into tin cups, the smell filling the small cabin. "Eat. Then we're talking about your shoulder." "My shoulder is fine." "Your shoulder is hurting, and you're too stubborn to admit it." She thrust a cup at him. "Eat, Matthias. Don't make me force-feed you." Despite his exhaustion, his mouth quirked. "I'd like to see you try." She raised an eyebrow, and after a moment, he took the cup, his cold fingers brushing hers. The touch sent a jolt through her, even after all these months of marriage. Some things never got old. They ate in companionable silence, listening to the wind howl outside. When Matthias finished his second helping, Evangeline moved behind him and began working the knots out of his shoulders. He tensed initially, then groaned as her fingers found the scar tissue. "Go slow," he murmured. "It hurts." "I know, love, I know." She worked carefully, feeling the tight muscles gradually relax under her touch. "Matthias, you can't keep doing this. You're going to collapse." "Can't lose the herd," he said stubbornly. "We lose too many cattle, we lose the ranch. Everything we've built means nothing if you kill yourself protecting it." She pressed a kiss to the top of his head. "You have men, good men. Let them help. Tom and Frank can handle the southern pasture. You need to come home. Get warm, get rest. Can't leave them out here while I sit cozy by the fire." So we bring them in shifts. 2 days out, 1 day in. Everyone gets rest. Everyone stays alive. She moved around to face him, cupping his cold cheeks in her hands. You're not alone anymore, Matthias Cade. You don't have to carry everything yourself. That's what together means. He stared at her for a long moment, those gray eyes searching her face. Then he pulled her into his lap, burying his face against her neck. How did I get so lucky? You won a poker game, she said lightly, but her arms tightened around him. Best hand you ever played. Best hand I ever played, he agreed. They stayed like that until Tom knocked tentatively on the door, and Matthias reluctantly let her go. But when he rode back to the main house that evening, she rode beside him, and when he tried to go back out the next morning, she had the schedule already worked out with Frank and the other hands. Together. Always together. Spring brought its own challenges. The cattle had survived winter, but barely, and Matthias was already planning for the drive to market in Cheyenne. It would take 3 weeks, maybe 4, and he'd be gone for all of it. I don't like leaving you, he said for the 10th time, pacing their bedroom like a caged wolf. Not this far along. Evangeline looked down at her swollen belly. 7 months now, and the baby was active, kicking her ribs at all hours. Ayashi will be here, and Mrs. Chen from the neighboring ranch offered to come stay if I need her. We'll be fine. You don't know that. Matthias stopped pacing and knelt beside her chair, his large hands covering her belly. What if the baby comes early? What if something goes wrong? Then Ayashi will handle it. She's delivered dozens of babies. Evangeline stroked his hair, feeling the tension in him. Matthias, we need this drive. The cattle prices are good right now, and if we don't sell, we'll struggle through next winter. I know. He pressed his forehead against her belly, and she felt the baby kick against him. A smile ghosted across his harsh features. Strong, like her mother. Or him? Her, Matthias said with certainty. Another woman to rat me around her little finger. Evangeline laughed, the sound bright in the evening air. You're already wrapped around this one's finger, and she hasn't even been born yet. He left 3 days later, with 20 hands and 3,000 head of cattle, and the ranch suddenly felt enormous and empty. Evangeline threw herself into work, supervising the remaining men, tending the kitchen garden that was finally starting to grow, working on the baby's room with Ayashi. 2 weeks passed, then 3. She tried not to worry when Matthias didn't return on schedule, tried to remember that cattle drives were unpredictable, that weather and markets could delay everything. Then, on a Tuesday afternoon, a rider came tearing into the ranch yard, his horse lathered and blowing. Evangeline recognized him as Jake Morrison, one of the younger hands who'd gone on the drive. "Mrs. Cade," he shouted, practically falling from his saddle. "We need help. The boss, Matthias, there was a stampede. Cattle rustlers spooked the herd, and he got thrown trying to turn them. He's hurt bad, ma'am. Real bad." The world tilted. Evangeline gripped the porch railing to keep from falling, her pregnant belly making her balance precarious. "Where is he?" "About 15 miles north in a box canyon. We couldn't move him. Didn't want to risk it with his ribs all broken up and his leg." Jake swallowed hard. "He's asking for you, Mrs. Cade. Won't let the doc do much until he sees you." Evangeline was moving before she finished processing the words. "Ayashi, get the wagon ready and the medical supplies. Everything we have." She turned to Jake. "Can you ride back and tell him I'm coming?" "Yes, ma'am, but Mrs. Cade, you shouldn't..." I mean, in your condition. My husband is hurt and asking for me, Evangeline said, her voice like steel. Nothing on this earth is keeping me from him. Now ride. Jake rode. The 15-mile journey felt like 1,500. Every bump in the wagon sent pain shooting through Evangeline's back, and the baby was restless, as if sensing her distress. Iyashi drove with grim determination, and two of the ranch hands rode escort in case the rustlers were still around. They found the camp as the sun was setting. Matthias lay on a bedroll near the fire, his face gray with pain, his left leg splinted with rough boards. Frank Yates crouched beside him, looking helpless and scared. "Eva," Matthias breathed when he saw her climbing awkwardly down from the wagon. "You shouldn't have come. The baby." "The baby is fine." She knelt beside him as best she could, her hands already assessing his injuries. Broken ribs, definitely. She could see the shallow, pained way he breathed. The leg looked bad, swollen and bruised. "What happened?" "Rustlers hit us at night," Frank said quietly. "Started shooting, spooked the herd. Matthias went after them, trying to turn the cattle. His horse went down, and he got caught in the stampede. Would have been killed if Tom hadn't roped him and dragged him clear." Evangeline's hands shook as she cut away Matthias's pant leg to examine the break. It was bad. Compound fracture, bone visible through torn skin. He needed a real doctor, proper surgery. But moving him 15 miles in his condition could kill him. "We have to set it here," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "Iyashi, I need the whiskey and the laudanum. Frank, get 4 of the strongest men. This is going to hurt like hell." Matthias's hand caught hers. "Eva, listen to me if something happens. If I don't make it, you're making it," she said fiercely. "You hear me, Matthias Cade? You're not dying on me. Not today. Not ever. We had a deal, together, remember? You don't get to break that deal." "Together," he whispered, and something in his eyes broke her heart. "Love you, Eva. Tell our daughter. You'll tell her yourself." She leaned down and kissed him, hard and desperate. "After I fix this leg and get you home. Now drink this." She poured laudanum down his throat, waited for it to dull the worst of the pain, then looked at Frank and the assembled hands. "When I count to 3, you pull. Don't stop until I say, no matter how much he screams. Understand?" They understood. What followed was the longest hour of Evangeline's life. Matthias did scream, a terrible sound that would haunt her dreams, but she worked with steady hands, setting the bone, cleaning the wound, stitching torn flesh. Iyashi assisted with calm efficiency, and when it was finally done, when the leg was properly splinted and bandaged, Evangeline sat back on her heels and let herself shake. "Will he be all right?" Frank asked quietly. "If infection doesn't set in." Evangeline wiped blood from her hands. "We need to get him home, but not until morning. The wagon ride will be agony for him, but we don't have a choice." Matthias drifted in and out of consciousness that night, and Evangeline stayed by his side, holding his hand, whispering to him. Once, near dawn, his eyes opened clear and focused. "You're still here," he murmured. "Where else would I be?" She pressed her lips to his knuckles. "I'm not leaving you, Matthias. Not ever. Stubborn woman. You knew that when you married me." She smiled through her tears. "Go back to sleep, love. We have a long ride tomorrow." "Together," he whispered. "Together," she promised. The journey back to the ranch was torture for everyone involved. Despite the laudanum, Matthias was in agony, and every bump and jolt of the wagon made him bite back groans. Evangeline rode in the back with him, his head in her lap, using her body to cushion him as much as possible, despite her own discomfort. The baby wasn't happy about the situation either, kicking and squirming, and by the time they reached the ranch, Evangeline was having occasional contractions. Not labor, not yet, but warning signs that her body was under too much stress. "Bed rest," Ayashi said firmly, after they'd gotten Matthias settled in their room, and she'd examined Evangeline. "For both of you. Him for his leg, you for the baby. No arguments." For once, neither of them had the energy to argue. The next 2 weeks were the hardest of Evangeline's life. Matthias fought fever and infection, his body battling the trauma of his injuries. She sat beside him day and night, cooling his fevered skin with damp cloths, forcing water and broth down his throat, changing his bandages with gentle hands. She talked to him constantly, even when he couldn't respond. Told him about the baby's movements, about the ranch hands asking after him, about her plans for the nursery. Reminded him that she needed him, that their daughter needed him, that he'd promised her forever, and she was holding him to it. On the 8th day, the fever broke. Evangeline had dozed off in the chair beside the bed, her hand clasped in his, when she felt him squeeze her fingers. Her eyes flew open to find him watching her, his gray eyes clear for the first time in over a week. "Hey," he rasped, his voice rough from disuse. "Hey yourself." Tears streamed down her face as she leaned forward to kiss his forehead. "You scared me half to death, you stubborn man." "Sorry." He tried to smile, but even that seemed to exhaust him. "The baby? Still cooking. Ayashe says another month, maybe less." She placed his hand on her belly, and right on cue, the baby kicked. "See? She's been waiting for her daddy to wake up." "She's strong," Matthias murmured, wonder in his voice. "Like you. She gets it from both of us." Evangeline settled back in her chair, refusing to let go of his hand. "The rustlers?" Dead or scattered, Frank handled it. His jaw tightened. "They killed 2 of our men, Eva. Tom Bridger and Carlos Mendez. Good men. Men with families. I know." She'd wept for them, helped Ayashi prepare their bodies for burial, written letters to their widows. "We'll take care of their families, together." "Together," he agreed. Then, "I'm sorry I scared you. Don't do it again." She tried to sound stern, but her voice broke. "I can't lose you, Matthias. I won't survive it." "You would." His hand tightened on hers. "You're the strongest person I know, Eva Cade. But you won't have to find out, because I'm not going anywhere. Made you a promise, remember? Forever." "Forever," she echoed, and finally let herself believe he was going to be all right. Matthias healed slowly, his leg knitting back together, but leaving him with a limp that would never fully disappear. He hated being confined to bed, hated being helpless, but Evangeline was merciless in enforcing Ayashe's orders. "You move before that leg is ready, and you'll cripple yourself for life," she said, blocking his path when he tried to get up for the 3rd time that day. "Is that what you want? To never ride midnight again? To not be able to teach our daughter to rope?" That stopped him. Matthias sank back against the pillows with a frustrated growl. "I hate this." "I know." She settled beside him on the bed, her pregnant belly making the movement awkward. "But sometimes the bravest thing a man can do is rest and heal. You're not weak for needing time to recover, Matthias. You're smart." He pulled her against his side carefully, mindful of his ribs. "When did you get so wise?" "I've always been wise. You just didn't notice because you were too busy being stubborn." She rested her head on his good shoulder, feeling his heartbeat steady and strong beneath her ear. "Tell me about Rebecca." Matthias went still. Why? Because we never talk about her. Because she was your first wife and the mother of the child you lost, and I want to know about her. Evangeline looked up at him. I'm not jealous, Matthias. How could I be jealous of a woman who isn't here to love you? But she was part of your life, and I want to understand all of you. For a long moment, he didn't speak. Then, quietly, she was gentle, soft-spoken, everything I thought a wife should be. He stared at the ceiling, his voice distant. We married young. She was 17. I was 23. Her father wanted the land, and I wanted, I don't know, to not be alone, I guess. Did you love her? In my way. But it wasn't. He struggled for words. It wasn't like this. Wasn't fire and storms and His arm tightened around her. What I feel for you, Eva? It's terrifying. Because losing Rebecca hurt, but losing you would destroy me. You're not just part of my life. You're the center of it. The reason I wake up. The reason I fight. The reason I want to build something that lasts. Evangeline felt tears slide down her cheeks. I love you too, so much it scares me sometimes. They lay together in the fading afternoon light, and Evangeline thought about the night in the Silver Dollar Saloon when she'd been offered as a poker wager, about how far they'd come from that desperate, broken woman and the hard man who'd refused to see her as property. About how love wasn't always pretty or easy or comfortable. Sometimes it was blood and pain and sitting beside your husband's sickbed praying he'd survive. Sometimes it was setting broken bones with shaking hands and refusing to let him see your fear. But it was also this, lying together in the quiet, sharing old hurts and new dreams, building something stronger than either of them had ever been alone. Matthias, she murmured. Thank you for winning that poker game. She felt him smile against her hair. Thank you for being worth winning. 3 weeks later, on a warm July night with lightning flashing on the horizon, Evangeline went into labor. It started as a vague cramping during dinner. Nothing alarming, but within an hour, the contractions were coming hard and fast. Ayesha took one look at her and shooed Matthias out of the room despite his protests. This is women's work, the old woman said firmly. You go downstairs and pace like husbands do. We will call you when the baby comes. I'm not leaving her, Matthias said stubbornly, leaning on the cane he now needed for walking. His leg had healed, but it would never be the same, and stairs were a challenge. Matthias, go, Evangeline said through gritted teeth, as another contraction hit. I love you, but I don't want you seeing this, please. He looked torn, but finally nodded and limped from the room, throwing one last worried glance over his shoulder. What followed was hours of pain, unlike anything Evangeline had experienced. She'd thought she was prepared. Ayesha had explained what to expect, but the reality was overwhelming. Contractions racked her body like waves, each one worse than the last, and she lost track of time entirely. You're doing well, Ayesha murmured, checking her progress. Not much longer now. The baby's head is crowning. I can't, Evangeline gasped, exhausted beyond measure. I can't do this. You can. You must. Ayesha's voice was firm, but kind. Your daughter is ready to meet you. Now push. Evangeline pushed, screaming with the effort. And suddenly there was a release of pressure, and the sound of a baby crying, strong, healthy, outraged at being forced into the cold world. A girl, Ayesha said with satisfaction, placing the squalling infant on Evangeline's chest. Perfect. Beautiful. Evangeline looked down at her daughter, tiny and red-faced and covered in vernix, with a shock of dark hair and eyes that would probably turn gray like her father's, and felt love slam into her with the force of a stampede. "Hey, little one," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Hey, Rebecca Grace, welcome home." The door burst open, and Matthias limped in, his face wild with worry. "I heard screaming, I heard—" He stopped dead at the sight of Evangeline holding the baby, and his expression crumbled. "Oh God, Eva, is she? Are you? We're perfect," Evangeline said, smiling through her tears. "Come meet your daughter." Matthias approached slowly, as if afraid the moment might shatter. When he reached the bed, he stared down at the baby with such naked awe that Evangeline's heart ached. "Can I hold her?" His voice was barely a whisper. "She's your daughter, too." With shaking hands, Matthias lifted the baby from Evangeline's arms, cradling her against his broad chest with a gentleness that seemed impossible from a man his size. Rebecca Grace stopped crying almost immediately, her tiny hand wrapping around one of his fingers. "She knows you," Evangeline said softly. "She heard your voice for months. She knows her daddy." A single tear tracked down Matthias's scarred cheek. "Hey, Becca," he murmured to the baby. "I'm your papa, and I promise you, little girl, nothing in this world will ever hurt you. I'll die first." Evangeline reached out and caught his hand, linking the three of them together. Husband, wife, daughter. "Together," she said, "together." Matthias agreed, and kissed first the baby's forehead, then Evangeline's lips. My two girls, my whole world. As lightning continued to flash outside and rain began to drum on the roof, Evangeline looked at her husband, holding their newborn daughter, and thought about how far they'd come. From a poker wager to this moment. A family born from desperation and luck, and something neither of them had expected. Love. Real, fierce, unbreakable love. And it was more than worth every hard moment, every struggle, every fear. Because this, holding their daughter with Matthias beside her, the three of them, safe and together in the home they'd built, this was everything. "I love you," she told Matthias, her voice thick with emotion. He looked up from the baby, his gray eyes shining. "I love you too, Eva Cade, more than I knew was possible. Thank you." "For what?" "For saving me," he said simply. "For being brave enough to say yes when I asked. For giving me this," he looked down at Rebecca Grace, "when I thought I'd never have it again." "You saved me first," Evangeline reminded him, "in that saloon, when you saw a person instead of property." "We saved each other," Matthias corrected, echoing her words from so long ago. "And now we get to save her. Raise her right. Show her what real love looks like." Evangeline smiled, exhausted but happier than she'd ever been. "She's going to be trouble, you know, with your stubborn streak and my temper." "Can't wait," Matthias said, and the love in his voice, the pure joy, was the most beautiful thing Evangeline had ever heard. Outside, the storm raged, but inside, safe in their bedroom with their newborn daughter between them, Matthias and Evangeline Cade held each other close and knew that no matter what challenges came, they would face them the same way they'd faced everything else. Together. Always together. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I'd love to know where you're enjoying this tale from. Are you listening at home, during your commute, or perhaps while working? Please subscribe to the From Wild West channel and share your thoughts in the comments below. What did you think of Evangeline and Matthias's journey? Your feedback means the world to us.